the key highlights, obviously, the fact that the travel from Australia to New Zealand will commence from the 19th of April, so 10 p.m. Sunday evening on the 18th of April in Australia. The first departures would be allowed if there were flights available at that point. Let's look at the traffic light system as well that Jacinda Ardern discussed there with her COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins. This is the green travel to continue if there were to be one case linked to a border, either a quarantine worker or something, so a minor case. The flights would be allowed to continue. Travel would be paused, though, if there was a case of an unknown source, likely linked to the border, and an Australian state enters a short-term lockdown. Flights would be paused for up to 72 hours. And then the red light would be put up, travel suspended. If there were multiple cases from an unknown source, a state in Australia were to be put in long-term lockdown. Let's bring in my colleague, Trudy McIntosh. Trudy, so Jacinda Ardern really wants to welcome Australians back across the ditch, but making it clear their travel won't be the same as it was pre-COVID, understandably.
She's saying, Kieran, that it won't get back to even 80% of pre-COVID levels until she thinks at least next year. But plenty of excitement on both sides of the ditch. We know up until now there'd been a one-way travel bubble in place, so New Zealanders able to come to Australia without having to go into quarantine. But when they returned home, they had to go into this 2 weeks of managed isolation. That will now be removed from just under 2 weeks from now, so anyone can go over and enjoy the sights of New Zealand or have a family reunion, as the Prime Minister pointed out. She expects that's going to be the bulk of what we see early on in this travel. But I think it's interesting to point out that this is a dramatic shift in strategy from New Zealand. We know all of last year, Jacinda Ardern has been talking about 28 days of no community transmission. Australia had reached that point previously in the pandemic, but then was thrown off course by outbreaks that we saw, particularly that Northern Beaches outbreak. Interesting as well to hear questions from the press pack there in Wellington asking the Prime Minister whether this sort of framework that we've now seen in place, a traffic light framework, could have been implemented earlier. She says she believes, Kieran, now is the right time for this to be in place, that they've got all of the safety checks and all the protocols in place, that they can manage this two-way traffic now coming across the Tasman.
And Trudy, the Prime Minister also indicating that she wants to host our Prime Minister in a well-known tourist region of New Zealand. I think I might guess where, in the South Island, but that should at least be picturesque, their next face-to-face talks.
We don't have an exact date of that yet, but the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, saying she expects that face-to-face meeting with Scott Morrison to happen very shortly. We know that a lot of these meetings have had to take place over Zoom at the height of the pandemic. I'm sure the Prime Minister, he's now had his 2 Pfizer jabs of the vaccine, will be very happy to do these face-to-face meetings with Jacinda Ardern. There's still a lot of thorny issues between the two nations, despite the fact that they have a very strong people-to-people relationship. We know Jacinda Ardern has said in the past that she wants to raise the issue of deportations from Australia to New Zealand in her meeting with the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.